my fellow wizards, stone skeleton key bosses have changed quite a bit over the years, especially after the summer 2022 update, which created brand new key bosses while tweaking many of the older bosses, so I figured it was about time for an update. Many old gold key bosses were actually demoted to stone key bosses, which I'm sure didn't leave any lingering resentment. Anyway, for those that don't know, these bosses can drop everything from rare and powerful gear, to pets, permanent mounts, valuable seeds and jewels, and much more, so it's absolutely worth taking the time to farm them, assuming you have the keys. Thankfully, for those of you in need, I have a video dedicated to the best ways to farm stone skeleton keys, which you can check out in the description. And to help you decide how to best use your keys, I'm here to offer the ultimate stone skeleton key boss guide, which will show you how to find each boss, general strategies to counter their many cheats, and what types of goodies each boss drops. So let's get started. First, let's start with the Aethyr Elemental, a boss located in the northeast Arrow Plains near the bridge, and I literally complained about this in a different video, but if Krakatopia can get updated local teleports, then why can't we have them here? Every time I have to go through this area, I feel like Rose from the Titanic.
It's been 84 years.
Anyway, though this fight may look straightforward enough at first, don't be fooled. First, the boss casts Lord of Winter on any wizard who is late to the fight. It also casts Double Cleanse Ward if a feint spell is placed on it, although Indemnity can protect them. Casting any heal over time spells will cause the elemental to cast Snowdrift and steal the heal, and damage over time spells will trigger a mass triage counter. And during the initial boss phase, any blades, negative charms, or global spells will trigger mass enfeeble. So, strategy-wise, you'll want to trap a bunch and avoid charms and global spells like bubbles. If you want to feint, make sure you use Indemnity to protect it, and ideally cast it first, because Aethyr Elemental will remove the past 2 traps used on him when you do, and you don't want to lose a previous trap you already placed. Once you get enough traps piled on, you can finish him in one hit and you're done! Except you're not. Yep, this boss has multiple phases and we are just getting started. Each time you defeat the Aethyr Elemental, it splits into additional versions, each with half the original health. And now you have to kill them all over again. Thankfully, after the first phase, you can use blades freely throughout the rest of the fight, so it's a lot easier to build up enough damage to finish them off. However, one last phase awaits you, as after you beat the twin Aethyr Elementals, they split again into 4, each with 8,000 health. Once you finally kill this group, ideally with an AoE, you're actually done and will earn the Aethyr Eater badge. Whew! After all this effort, you'll get some pretty interesting drops, including cosmetic versions of the Elegant School Insignia gear, Xanadu School Mastery amulets with Pierce cards, although these are much less useful after the Archmastery update, Sycorax wands, which can be nice for stitching, and the very cool Aethyr Cloud permanent mount. Up next is Aphrodite II, a boss that is actually inside of the final Darkmoor dungeon, the Graveyard. Once inside, instead of going to fight the first boss, take a left and head straight for the stone key door at a gate. For this fight, you'll be fighting Aphrodite's tendrils, which are a random combo of life, death, and myth schools. If any blades or bubbles are cast, the tendril across from the wizard will cheat cast various punishing cheats, depending on the school of the tendril, although once a tendril is defeated, the wizard across from that tendril is safe to cast blades without further cheats. For reference, this chart shows what spots are across from each other in regards to cheats. Following the same pattern, the tendrils across from a player will also cheat various spells when anyone casts a damage over time spell or if a wizard is defeated. In addition, every round that a tendril is not attacked, Aphrodite will cast a spell that deals 333 shadow damage and 666 shadow damage over 3 rounds, applies a negative 30% weakness, a negative 40% accuracy debuff, and a negative 50% healing charm, which is, you know, not fun.
Already dead.
Thankfully, if even just one of the tendrils is attacked in a given round, you'll be safe from this cheat. So, for strategy, you'll generally want a spammer whose job it is to hit at least one of the tendrils each round with either wand hits or other low-cost spells to prevent Aphrodite's main cheat from activating. Everyone else should be trapping any tendrils that aren't going to be hit by the spammer, which will allow your main hitter to take everyone out in one hit with an AoE, with your trappers mass trapping the final tendril on the last turn. Feints, regular traps, and auras are all fine to use, but avoid blades. Once you've successfully taken out Aphrodite's tendrils, you'll get the badge, Flower Power, and some pretty awesome loot. Aphrodite can actually drop some pretty amazing free energy gear, including a ring, athame, and wand for each school. In fact, the ring and athame are actually the current best free energy versions you can get, and if you want more info on the best free energy gear in the game in general, you can check out my other video on the subject. In addition, Aphrodite also drops some pretty decent damage rings that compete directly with Morganth's newer level 100 rings, though it mostly depends on your school if one is better than the other, so you'll want to check individually. Finally, I want to give people a heads up that while Aphrodite used to drop the life spell Sacred Charge, that has changed and it is now dropped instead by the Gold Key boss Lambent Fire in Avalon. And if you want more info on Gold Key bosses and their drops, I also have a separate guide for that as well. However, we're not quite done with Darkmoor just yet. There's actually a second stone key door here, this time in the first dungeon, Castle Darkmoor. Unfortunately, to get to it, you'll need to fight two fairly difficult bosses, Howling Chaney and Sir Blackwater. Once you defeat Sir Blackwater, you'll head up a set of stairs and find the key door about halfway up. Unlock the door and head inside, and you'll see a treasure chest, no boss fight required. Simply approach and interact with the chest for some drops, although unfortunately they are rather mediocre. The stone key chest drops Tier 3 Darkmoor Athames, Tier 3 and Tier 1 amulets, and Tier 3 decks, none of which are that great. The Athames are outclassed by those dropped by Yevgeny Nightcreeper in the Graveyard or Morganth in Chrysalis, and the Tier 3 amulets are basically worse versions of the Shane Von Shane Pierce amulets. Even the Tier 1 amulets aren't really worth the trouble since they're just school mastery amulets that aren't that useful after the Archmastery update. The decks are also nothing too special. Considering you also have to fight two difficult bosses to even reach the stone key door, this feels like a pretty big waste of a skeleton key. I really don't recommend trying to farm this one, it's just gonna disappoint you.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
Moving on, let's talk about Bellosh, cousin to Belloch in Zafaria, and just as annoying. You can find him halfway through the House of Skills dungeon in Upper Zigzag, which is accessed at level 60 by talking to Alhazred in Krakatopia and using this statue to teleport there. You'll have to fight through two mobs to reach him, but you'll then see his door straight ahead right before fighting the first boss, Ist, to the left. Thankfully, if you've beaten Belloch in Zafaria, you should know the drill here, because Bellosh's cheat is identical. Basically, if he's not attacked at least once per round, then the next round he'll cast Ra, though thankfully it's the original version without the negative 40% weakness. He's easy enough to deal with if you have a spammer to hit him with some low-level spells each round, while everyone else buffs up to AoE, and if you're soloing, you can also try using damage over time spells to keep damaging him every round while you blade and trap. At higher levels, he can honestly just be tanked. So overall, this fight is pretty easy with a group or solo. Upon defeat, you'll earn the Caged the Elephant badge as a bonus. As for drops, Bellosh mostly drops Tier 3 Zigzag gear, which is very lacking compared to the Tier 1 gear that drops from Amit the Devourer at the end of the dungeon. He does drop some Tier 3 amulets that do give a Blade item card, but again, these are outclassed by higher amulet tiers from the same dungeons, and are worse than the level 60 Shango's amulets that can literally be bought for gold in Zafaria. Otherwise, Bellosh does drop some sort of interesting decks that give a slight accuracy bonus and come with different jewel slots, but to me, they're not really worth the trouble. Finally, he does drop the Mander Palanquin permanent mount, which is nice, but you can also get the same mount from the wooden key boss Ra, who I would argue is a much more accessible, easier farm. Overall, there may be a few things here people are interested in, but I don't generally find Bellosh worth the cost of the stone key. Speaking of bosses in Zafaria, our next stone key boss is Captain Hockins, who can be found in the waterfront in this building to the left-hand side. Just like Bellosh, you'll need to do some spamming here, though this boss works a little bit differently. Basically, from the start, Captain Hockins acts like he's cosplaying a Toxic Jade player and has resist through the roof. Thankfully, if you smack him around a bit, he'll start to see some sense. Every time you hit Captain Hockins, he'll give the player who attacked a Dragon Spear with increasing Pierce up to 100% maximum if hit 10 times. Meanwhile, his minion, the Witch Doctor, starts out by casting Saga of Heroes, which lowers a wizard's critical chance by 75. In addition, he'll replace any bubbles by recasting Saga of Heroes, and if anyone joins late, he'll cast Steel Pips on them. Honestly, this fight is mostly about patience and persistence, so the goal should be to quickly take out the minion and then start spamming Captain Hockins with low-cost spells while building up Pierce buffs over time. You can Blade, Trap, Aura, and Feint normally, so once you have enough Pierce, you can feel free to take him out and get the Hockins Hex badge in the process. As for drops, you can get Captain Hockins' pet, Burlap Boy, which kind of feels like a nickname you'd only give to someone if you were trying to bully them. But okay, and it gives a Clockwork Golem item card. In addition, you can get Novice, Adept, and Expert socket wrenches, which are handy, as well as the permanent 2-person Pirate Rowboat mount. I'd mainly say this boss is only worth fighting if you like collecting pets and or mounts, but it's up to you. Heading now to Imperia, we have Corporal Tennisyn, a stone key boss tucked away in the Xanadu sewers, which can be accessed from several points in Xanadu proper. Depending on where you go down, you'll want to head down one tunnel into a large chamber, then head left and take a second tunnel all the way to the end where you'll see the stone key door. And let me just say that Corporal Tennisyn is basically a storm wizard on steroids. To start, every round he'll get an additional number of power pips equal to the number of wizards in the fight -1. So the more wizards there are, the more pips he gets, which really add up fast. Also, Tennisyn will quickly start to build up shadow pips, and when he reaches 7, he will cast Lord of the Squall, which is a shadow spell that will basically wipe everyone out, so you need to finish this fight as soon as possible. Additional cheats include him escalating every time someone tries to dispel him, first just by using Cleanse Charm, but eventually adding healing and attacks as well if you keep dispelling him. Tennisyn also hates feints, but will tolerate them if you only place one feint on him per round. If you try to place additional feints, he'll cast Double Cleanse Ward to remove them. In addition, he absolutely loses it if a damage over time is used after a feint is cast on him in the same turn. For some reason, casting Windstorm, Supercharge, Storm Spear, a Stormhound AoE, Shift, Incendiate, and then Cleanse Ward on himself to remove all traps, which seems like a bit of an overreaction, to be honest. Finally, every 4 rounds, Tennisyn will use his natural attack followed up by casting Wild Bolt on random wizards up to 7 times. Strategy-wise, you can trap, aura, and blade freely, just make sure to only place one feint on Tennisyn per round to avoid his cheats. Since Tennisyn likes to spam some very strong storm attacks, defensive spells like Volcanic Shield are your friend. Otherwise, you can buff and hit like usual with a strong single-hit attack since he has no minions to worry about. Just make sure not to let the battle drag on too long in case he gets those 7 shadow pips. Upon defeat, you'll earn the Wind Against Tennisyn badge. Thankfully, for your hard work, Tennisyn does drop some pretty fantastic treasure. First, you can get some cosmetic school-themed insignia gear, as well as some pack gear and wands from the Alfoy Hoard pack. There's also some handy artisan and master socket wrenches, couch potato seeds, and some pretty nice healing and shadow pip jewels. However, the Light Brigade gear is where Corporal Tennisyn really has some farming value. For most schools, the Light Brigade robe is a direct upgrade to the level 100 Darkmoor robes, except for Storm, who's basically stuck with their Malister robe for the next 60 levels. Yeah, nothing broken about that. Obviously, if you're going to be farming Dragoon gear at level 130, it may be worth just skipping these robes, but otherwise they can be a great option while leveling and well worth the stone key. And actually, speaking of Dragoon gear, our next boss on the list is Fellspawn, who can be found in this part of the catacombs of Wizard City in the bottom left corner. To get here, you'll want to use the Drain's entrance in Golem Court, and then head down the passage to the right until you hit the catacombs, though you do need to complete some quests first to access the area. Once you enter, be prepared, as this can be a fairly tricky boss fight. At the start of the fight, Fellspawn summons 3 random school minions and casts a bubble that sets the damage cap to 9,999. While the bubble is up, damage cannot go above this limit when hitting, and if the bubble is replaced, Fellspawn just recasts it. As you kill minions, Fellspawn will also resummon them over time, making this fight much harder. To make matters worse, at the start of the 5th round, Fellspawn summons an unhelpful minion to your side if all the duel slots aren't filled, who casts helpful spells like shields and blades on Fellspawn's side, and spells like Black Mantle and Weakness on yours. In addition, every 5th round, Fellspawn will also cast Black Mantle, Weakness, and Hex on a random wizard and cast Bladestorm and Mass Tower Shield on his side. If any wizard casts a blade, Fellspawn will mana burn them and cast Enfeeble on the receiver of the blade, and if Dispel Charm is used on Fellspawn, he will cast Cleanse Charm, removing all negative charms from himself. Finally, if all that wasn't enough, on the 6th round, Fellspawn will polymorph into a moon form lasting 3 rounds, and while in this form, he loses all stats and cannot gain any power or shadow pips. While in polymorph form, if a wizard casts a trap, he will cast Cleanse Ward to remove all traps from the target and cast a double stun on the wizard. So with all that, how do you begin to fight this guy? During Fellspawn's first phase, you cannot blade, so you'll want to focus on trapping, and thankfully, you can use feint freely. I recommend stacking several different fates on Fellspawn if possible. Once Fellspawn polymorphs on the 3rd round into the moon form, you now cannot trap, so you should switch to blading up instead. If the minion Fellspawn summons to your side is causing trouble, you can also use a TC like Sap Health to sacrifice him for a bit of health back too. In addition, spells like Pierce and Cleanse Charm can also be helpful in removing any unwanted shields or weaknesses. However, my key tip is to find a way around Fellspawn's damage cap bubble, which means you'll need the spell Nightbringer, which can actually be gotten using spell elements dropped by other Catacombs bosses or from the Druid's Hoard pack. Basically, it delays a spell from being cast for 1 round and then casts it the second round. So how does that help us? Once your team has bladed and trapped up enough that you're ready to hit, you'll want your main hitter to enchant your AoE with Nightbringer, causing it to be delayed by 1 round. That next round, your hitter will then cast a bubble spell to replace Fellspawn's damage cap, which will immediately be followed by your Nightbringer enchanted AoE spell, which will hit everything before Fellspawn can recast the damage cap bubble, allowing you to bypass the damage limitation and kill everyone in one go. Now, obviously, if you don't have Nightbringer, you won't be able to use this strategy, in which case you can also try to use multi-hit spells like Hydra, which can do 3 different hits up to 9,999 damage in 1 round, but you'll need to use multiple hits to reach his 46,000 health, which isn't ideal. You can absolutely beat this boss without Nightbringer, but it speeds everything way up to have it in your arsenal. Once you finally beat Fellspawn, you'll earn the Fellspawn badge and hopefully get some decent drops. His main loot is both the Tier 2 Vanguard and Tier 1 Dragoon gear pieces, which are generally some of the best gear you can have at level 130, although it does appear Fellspawn can be pretty stingy with his drops, with some players doing many runs without any gear drops at all, which isn't great. He does also drop some handy Novice and Adept Socket Wrenches and Evil Magma Peas, but generally when his gear drop rate is so bad, I'm not really sure I can recommend him to players for farming when his fight is pretty difficult, and you might have better luck just grinding out reagents to craft your gear the old-fashioned way, even if it makes your ears bleed hearing this cursed voice line for the 1000th time.
Oh, please, you're rancid this.
After that nightmare, let's head back to Krakatopia, where you'll find Inzhizor in the lower zigzag dungeon near House of Scales, mentioned earlier. Upon entering the dungeon and finishing the first mob fight, you can head straight across this bridge in the upper right corner of the map and find his stone key door. Despite being a key boss, Inzhizor actually has no cheats and is a surprisingly easy boss, with his main annoyance being his ability to stun you with multiple spells. With only close to 6,000 health, he can be fairly easily soloed or defeated with a group, giving you the Inzhizor's Undoing badge. As for drops, he does give you some interesting athems that are exclusive to him, though I will say in general they are outclassed by the likes of the Lexicon Blade from the Tower of the Elephant dungeon, and even the level 56 Bear Claw athems, which can be found fairly easily in the Bazaar. Otherwise, Inzhizor drops the Sailback Skink pet with an Ice Armor item card and some very unique book wands that are this boss's main appeal. The book wands are identical, but do have a different version for each school and can be pretty great options for stitching. In fact, I have a different video covering these wands specifically if you're interested. Overall, if you'd like some cool wands for your wizard drip, then Inzhizor might be worth farming, but otherwise you can probably pass. Up next is Omen Stribog, who can be found near the teleport to the River of the Frozen Tears in Polaris. And unfortunately, he's not the only boss here, as he's joined by a Dark Fiend, Sentinel, and Seraph. At the beginning of the first round, the Dark Sentinel will cast Shadow Sentinel, which intercepts 75% of the damage to his side. While he's alive, the Sentinel will also cast Enfeeble whenever a wizard casts a blade, and any shield spells will cause him to cast Steel Ward on the caster. Meanwhile, whenever the Dark Seraph casts a healing spell, an extra Absorb will be placed on all enemies, making her heals extra potent. As for Omen himself, if a wizard casts Feint, he will remove the feint unless it's protected by Indemnity, although in a convenient twist, if you cast Mass Feint, he'll only remove the trap placed on the caster, which is nice, I guess. Thanks, buddy. In addition, if a wizard casts a Shadow Creature spell, Omen casts a Moon spell that adds 30 backlash to the wizard, although, let's be honest, almost no one uses Shadow Creature spells anymore, so whatever. Finally, if Omen is the last boss standing, he'll cast different variations of Amplify on himself to boost his damage indefinitely. So first, you'll definitely want to get rid of the Sentinel absorbing all the damage, but he has a hefty pool of 80,000 health, so you'll probably have to spend several rounds trap stacking him. Reminder that regular traps are fine, but feints will need Indemnity to protect them, and blades are not allowed while the Sentinel is alive. TC like Shatter or Pierce may also be helpful here to remove any shields before hitting the Sentinel with a massive single target hit, hopefully taking him out. After the Sentinel is dead, his damage intercept will disappear, and you can also blade freely again, allowing you to Indemnity, feint, trap, and blade up for an AoE that should take out the rest of the group. Once you defeat Omen, you'll earn the Omen's Adversary badge, as well as get a chance at his huge treasure trove of loot. To start, Omen drops the Lufulum gear, which honestly looks pretty cool and can be great for stitching, though stat-wise, it's generally outclassed by other options at this level. The amulet also acts as Mastery amulets with a nice blade item card, but are a lot less useful after the Arch Mastery update. Do note that for whatever reason, Laflamme gear is also no trade, meaning you need to get the drop on the wizard you want it for stitching. You won't be able to move it to other wizards through the shared bank, because, you know, why make things easy, right? In addition, Omen drops pack gear from the Witch's Hoard pack and Artisan socket wrenches, as well as a huge number of mounts and pets. For permanent mounts, he drops the Frostfang Tiger, Himalayan Yak, Lufalum Wings, Owl, Snow Ram, White Stag, Winter Treant, and Winterglide Skates. And for pets, he drops the Arctic Ninja Pig, Frosty Fish, Iceflow Siren, which is seasonal only, Polar Fox, Proper Penguin, Snowball, White Winter Owl, and Snow Beast. Obviously, with this many pets and mounts, this boss is perfect for farming if you're a collector, and many people love the gear appearance for stitching, so I'd say he's a solid option. After Omen, we're heading back to Wizard City, where you'll have to revisit an old dungeon to find our next Stone Key boss. Simon the Sayer can be found in Sunken City, whose entrance is right next to the Death School, and you'll find his key door by heading just a bit forward and to the left. Once inside, you'll have to play a game of Simon Says with the assistance of the NPC Daniel, who is actually based on a real-life player named Daniel who visited King's Isle through the Make-A-Wish Foundation and helped create the boss, which is actually really cool. Basically, for this fight, you'll need to pay attention to what Simon says and follow his rules to avoid Simon cheating. For the first 3 rounds, using a damage spell on Simon or his minions will cause him to cast an insane bolt. However, on rounds 4 through 6, Simon says you can attack now and you can freely damage him without retaliation. On round 7, the original no attack rule starts over, with the pattern repeating indefinitely. On the second round of the fight, Simon casts a spell that will summon one of 2 minions, and if any of them are defeated, he will summon a replacement several rounds later. If a wizard casts a blade at any point, he will cast Disarm to remove it. In addition, if a wizard casts a prism or shield, Simon's pet Polterpooch will place a feint on the caster. Thankfully, Daniel is also here to help during this fight. On round 3 and randomly afterwards, he will cast a curse on Simon after any other cheats Simon casts that round. He will also randomly cast a fairy that heals all wizards and applies guidance. With Simon's blade cheat, you'll mainly want to focus on trapping and feinting Simon until you have enough damage to one-hit AoE him and his minions, though blades protected by Aegis are probably safe from his disarm cheat. With only 12,000 health, you can pretty quickly stack multiple feints and take him out, so this fight shouldn't be too difficult. Upon defeating him, you'll get the Simon's Bane badge. For drops, you have the chance to get various cosmetic hairstyles, most of which can also be bought in the Crown Shop. You can also receive some nice triangle jewels, which offer triple shield spells that can otherwise only be gotten from jewel triangle blossom plants. He also drops the Brave, Fierce, and Ghost Hounds, and the Polterpooch pets, and some handy couch potato seeds. Finally, his main appeal are his school-themed Daniel's Answer wands, which look like giant greatswords with different colored particle effects that are great for stitching. For our second to last boss, we're heading to Caramel to make some s'mores because we'll be fighting the Stay Puft Marshfellow, which is 100% based off this monstrosity in Ghostbusters.
It's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
You'll find him in this location in the Nibelheim Mines, where he's joined by several Marshfellow minions. The devs appear to be fans of Twisted Children's games because, just like Simon says previously, we now have to play a messed up version of Hot Potato to win. On the first round and every 4 rounds afterwards, the Marshmallow casts a Shadow Damage over Time spell on a random wizard, which deals 5,265 damage after 4 rounds. The wizard who receives this will be given a Hot Potato Enemy and Hot Potato Friend spell, which are 0-pip versions of Shift to allow you to shift the damage over time to either an ally or enemy. If you try to remove the damage over time with spells like Triage or regular Shift, the boss will cast a Shadow spell to expel both the caster of the spells and the wizard affected by the damage over time. If your wizard passes the damage over time to the Marshfellow boss using the provided spell cards, he will shift it to a random minion, and this cheat will not activate if all minions are dead. At the end of a round, if a minion has the damage over time, they will shift it to a random wizard. If a minion is killed with the damage over time, however, the boss will cast a spell to heal 100% of his team's health, also reviving the minion. If a wizard casts a blade or global spell, the boss will cast various cheats including Mana Burn, Bad Juju, and Disarm. In addition, if Feint is cast, the boss will remove all traps from his allies, although Indemnity can protect the Feint. Since the minions do not respawn, your first priority is taking them out, which also nullifies a lot of the boss's cheats. You want to avoid spells like Feint and Blades, but regular traps and auras are fine and will allow you to AoE finish off the minions in the first few rounds. If you do use Indemnity Feint, make sure it's the very first trap you place because the boss cheats by removing all traps when you place it. After the minions are dead, you can focus on trapping and buffing up to take out the boss with a single hit, and you can also freely shift the damage over time hot potato to him without him moving it to a minion. Hopefully before too long you can finish off the Marshfellow and earn your Cross the Streams badge. Now onto the drops. First, he can drop the cosmetic Celestial School Insignia gear, which is nice for stitching, as well as the Tier 2 Wonderbar Caramel gear, which is outclassed by the Tier 1 Uber gear dropped by other bosses in Caramel. You can also get some pretty unique Marshmallow themed wands, which do have less damage than the Tier 1 Uber wands, but more pierce as a trade-off, so they may work for some builds at that level. There's also some Novice, Expert, and Adept socket wrenches, as well as the adorable, casual, fancy, and formal gummy bunnies and chocolate mousse permanent mounts. Between the unique wands and permanent mounts, this boss definitely has some goodies worth farming for. Finally, for our last entry, we have the Verboten Mimic, which can be found in this building in the River District of Agrabah in Mirage. And you'll be kept on your toes because the Mimic lives up to his name by being able to randomly polymorph into any of 5 different forms every 3 rounds, each with their own specific cheats. Since it's random, you need to prepare for any potential combo of transformations, some of which are far more annoying than others. First is Cyrus Drake, who, apart from making you pick up his dry cleaning, removes all traps from himself the first time he's trapped and will also cast Mystic Colossus. Then there's Prince Gobblestone, who is definitely the main one of the group that you do not want to get in the fight because he spams Tower Shields, Wings of Fate, and stun spells over his 3 rounds. There's also Leska Charmbeak, who has similar cheats to his Waterworks iteration, where he marks certain wizards who can attack him without him cheating, while the rest cannot. Like Cyrus, Leska also removes any traps which are used on him. Mithrea is the 4th potential Mimic, and she summons a minion and casts Smokescreen on her first round as well as any round where a wizard successfully casts a spell. If both blades and traps are present in the battle, the cheat will end. Finally is Ghost Dog, who summons 2 minions at the end of the first round and can randomly cast a damage over time spell that deals 4,000 damage over 10 rounds, though this can be countered with Triage. He can also cast a Detonate on the wizard with the damage over time, and if a wizard casts any shields, he will cast Shatter. With multiple enemies that can remove traps, your best bet is to stack blades and use auras or bubbles to boost your damage and hit. You'll also want TC like Shatter or Pierce to remove any shields if you're unfortunate enough to get Prince Gobblestone as a transformation. Once you have enough damage, feel free to hit with a single hit or AoE if the Mimic has summoned any minions, and you should get your Mimic Muter badge. The Mimic can drop a mini Mimic pet that looks exactly like him, which is kind of cute, as well as some Novice, Adept, and Expert socket wrenches and level 120 damage rings for every school. Unfortunately, the rings are generally going to be outclassed by rings dropped from Aphrodite II, mentioned earlier, or Morganth at level 100, so these probably aren't really worth farming for. Since Aphrodite in particular also drops some great energy gear, it's better to spend a stone key there instead of on the Mimic, making this boss a pass for me personally, which is sad because the fight itself has some interesting mechanics. But you know what they say, never trust a Mimic. Alright, my fellow wizards, that was the ultimate stone skeleton key boss guide. Which stone key bosses do you personally think are most worth farming, and which would you give a hard pass? If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and as always, I hope to see you out there in the spiral, and happy questing!